In this video, we will be talking about what is IoT remote monitoring. And before I go deep into what IoT remote monitoring is, let me spend some time as a reminder to explain what IoT is. I know most of you know that, but just as a reminder, let's go into what that is. So, IoT is really a connected device through usually sensor or some kind of device which connects to the internet or a network and transmits information which is useful. And when I talk about useful information, I will go through a little bit of those details a little later. But let's take this car for example. This car could send out signals of its location, transmit that information through the internet, and somebody could be getting that data. For example, an insurance company could know how fast you drive, how slow you drive, when do you put on brakes, where do you drive. All that information could be passed on. Or you could take, let's say, an appliance from a smart home, let's say a refrigerator, and it could be transmitting information about how cold it is inside, how hot it is outside, how many times are you opening and shutting down the refrigerator doors, or what is inside in terms of food inside the refrigerator. And all this information could be passed over through the internet for consumer in this example to have access to their refrigerator when they're traveling, see what's happening inside the refrigerator. So a lot of examples. Like I said, smart homes could have even lights which are connected to the, the internet, or even security cameras, right? So all these things can be connected to the internet. Now, there's a challenge as soon as you think about all these variety of devices or appliances getting connected, or machines getting connected to the internet, including coffee machines. You have an explosion of these devices, and it gets very, very hard to keep monitoring them. So this video is about IoT remote monitoring. So let me explain what that is in a bit. So IoT remote monitoring is the process of collecting data from these devices and then syncing it with the cloud. So you sync it with the cloud. When I say cloud, it could be a private cloud, it could be a public cloud. And then after you get that data there, you analyze it to ensure that these devices are performing as expected, right? So there are three stages. One is obviously you need these devices, IoT devices, the sensors and IoT devices, which has the ability to connect to the internet or a network. So you need to have those IoT devices, right? IoT devices. Then you need to store that data, sync it, get the data into the cloud. So sometimes some of these larger companies have a lot of IoT devices. Think supply chain, manufacturing, all these companies could have a lot of data and it has to be synced. So it has to be ingested, that's the word you use, into the cloud. We'll go into details later. And then this data has to be stored somewhere, so storage inside the cloud. And then you have to take all this data and analyze. So three steps. You get the device first, then you get the syncing to the cloud, and then you have to analyze it. Now, why would you need IoT remote monitoring? So there's a lot of data coming from these devices. Let's go through some examples of data which comes from these devices. So you would have device health information. Am I working? Am I not working? Simple as that. Or am I getting heated up? Or am I performing to my specs? So each of these IoT devices could be, simple as a smaller device, which does not cost that much money, but the industrial IoT devices are pretty expensive. So you need to keep track of this metric, which is device health. Sometimes these IoT devices say, I would perform or I would send data at a regular interval. So you need to keep track of that performance. When you have IoT devices, just like any other electronic device, you need way to make sure unauthorized access is not there, or it might even have its local password. So security information might need to be monitored, how secure those IoT devices are. You don't want these devices to be hacked, so hence you need some level of monitoring, right? Then this IoT device sends data, right? So when it sends data, you want to see how much data it's using. If it's a remote IoT device or a device which is getting used in larger supply chain, you also want to make sure it is using just the appropriate amount of data. It's not using too much data, right? It's sending these signals or data heartbeats every now and then. You don't need it streamed all the time. So you need an idea of how much data usage is being used. Data is being used by these devices. That's an important uh, data point for tracking. Last but not the least, you want to know if these devices are actually getting connected to the internet, to the network. It is supposed to connect. Sometimes when you have these devices in large manufacturing units, you could have machinery which gets in between these devices and stops. It does not get the required connection back to the network. So it could be there could be multiple reasons why that is happening. It could be, like I said, machines. It could be people interfering with these signals. It could be something else has changed. The network itself has changed, or some new interference has happened. So all these data points: device health, performance, security, data usage, and network connectivity, are things you typically monitor on an IoT device. So now once you monitor, what happens next? You get some benefits out of this. So let's talk about some benefits, especially in the commercial space. So you do want to detect issues in real time. So that's key. You don't want to wait for 5 days before you get that data and then do some stuff. So even though they transmit data, you want that real-time issue detection. You want to prevent downtime of these IoT devices, and the end goal is to optimize even device performance. So, like I said, IoT devices are pretty varied. Much even with simple IoT device, you get different manufacturers and different data collection routines, and then you might even have data loss. So the point is here to understand what's happening usually after transmission of the data. And then from a business point of view, there are kind of four different use cases which I can think about, and that typically come through as if somehow some way these IoT devices are used for uh, capturing asset information, or asset tracking. So it helps with detecting loss of assets. So you have an IoT device attached to an asset, and then that asset, something happens to that asset, or somebody steals that asset, you would know that something's wrong with that asset. So loss is a good big one where people attach IoT devices to large assets or expensive assets. The other one is condition of assets. So if you have a shipment, let's take an example of a shipment of pharmaceutical items, let's say medicines which are very expensive, treating specialized diseases, and they have to be transmitted or transported over in a specific transportation route, plus the right kind of temperature or pressure, and they can get that information coming from these IoT devices, right? So the condition of the assets also matters, so which could eventually, if it's bad condition, could lead to loss. So tracking that is important for a lot of companies. Last but not the least, you have ETA. Think this thing when you have. I'm not saying it's the same as Google Maps, but when you bring up your own Google Map, when you drive from one place to another, Google Maps, Apple Maps gives you an ETA, and it gives you some sense of comfort knowing that you will be at your destination in 20 minutes or 30 minutes, or it doesn't matter what that timing is. It doesn't matter, but you have an estimate coming, and that ETA stands for estimated time of arrival. And a lot of companies require tracking of assets, especially moving assets. And how do you calculate these ETA? It sounds easy, but it's you have millions of containers shipments. All these things have to be tracked, and then you have to somehow prioritize these shipments and explain to the customer or give that information back to your customer. So that's a big use case, which is also sometimes these kind of information is also used uh, at fast-paced use cases where you have use cases where if you look at Formula One cars, these cars actually equipped with hundreds of IoT sensors, and all this information gives the team enough information to know what needs to be done for that Formula One car. So it's an extreme example, but still IoT sensor type data is passed through these use cases, right? So one example I said was around shipment for ETA, and the other one is, how these devices operate in fast conditions. And a larger bucket is really around operational efficiency. So when you have manufacturing and you have some kind of IoT data passed through, it helps you understand how your manufacturing pipeline looks like. Are there any bottlenecks and what needs to be done? So from a manufacturing standpoint, it's big. It's also big in healthcare now. It's big in, like I said, supply chain. So there are a lot of places where IoT devices are coming through. And then, like I said, all this has to be somehow stored in a remote place like a cloud computing place or a public cloud or a private cloud, and then you have to analyze the data for your own business. So those are the benefits of IoT remote monitoring, and hopefully that made sense to you. Thank you.